Hey, everybody, welcome back to yet another show of the DLF Trade Show. Best trade show ever.
Oh my.
Ever. I mean, I had no place left to go. I guess I went YouTube, but ever. That's it. I said it. It's done. We're here. This is where we live now.
I feel like you have a finite amount of shows where you could do this because you can only keep going further and further.
Sooner or later, I was hitting the edge, the ceiling, and I skipped a rung or two on the ladder, but we're there. This is where we are. We live here in the space where the DLF Trade Show is the best trade show ever.
I'm all for it.
Maybe like 1A, 1B Trade Addicts pod. I mean, you know.
I'm with you. All under the DLF family, so we're just fantastic.
Yes. There you go. Love it. Putting it all together. I am your host, Russ Fisher at Dynasty Outhouse. He is your host, Addison Hayes, at Hayes _. And it's week 13 just passed, and it's really weird that now is not the playoffs. You know,
right?
The NFL has one extra week, so most leagues, so I'm guessing it's most likely not the playoffs for you. You have one more week of the regular season. And if you do have a trade deadline in your league, which it's not an argument we're going to get into, at least now, yeah, maybe on this show at some point, but at least not right now, it should be the start of playoffs. We're going to assume you have 1 week left to make some trades. And we picked a couple of players that we found very intriguing in one way or another on this trade deadline. And I mean, let's just jump right into it. We're going to talk about James Conner first. He's been going nuts, and it's great because, I mean, you're a Steelers guy, you're a Pitt guy, so, you know, you're all about James Conner. Pittsburgh, the area, Penn State, yeah. I know, sorry. I realized what I said and how wrong it was. The Pittsburgh area kind of guy, yes, because Pitt is the devil, I know. But James Conner is doing very, very well in this Cardinals offense, especially with Chase Edmonds hurt. He was doing well before. This man was just scoring a ridiculous amount of touchdowns, and he's still doing it, and he's getting a lot more carries now. So I think he's a great guy to go get right now to make that push. Or I like the idea of James Conner, and I kind of like the idea of James Conner for next season a little bit.
Yeah.
But not enough that if I can get a good deal that I wouldn't sell him to a contender right now. So we're going to go through some trades to see, you know, where we fall on it, if it's worth it for either of us to go in any direction. First trade, 12-team Superflex, James Conner and a 23 4th for Terrace Marshall and a 23 3rd.
You missed one.
Oh. Tommy Tremble, I apologize. I am so sorry. I did not mean to slight you in the way I just did. Let me start this over. James Conner and a 23 4th for Terrace Marshall, Tommy Tremble, and a 22 3rd.
There we go.
Let me ask you real quick, before we even get into this trade itself, are you a Terrace Marshall believer?
No, I'm not. I'll make that really easy.
Because, I mean, value-wise, this sort of lines up almost perfectly. James Conner, 82.9, which it's really going to be tough to get accurate reflection of value for guys like James Conner because he doesn't have a lot of dynasty value, but his fantasy value right now is very high. So his analyzer value is going to stay low. But man, having him on your team is going to be super helpful going in. So he needs to be valued a little more. But right now, 82.9. The 4th is 11.9. Terrace Marshall, 77.1. So Conner for Marshall is pretty much fine on its own. The 3rd is worth 40.9. Tremble, 11.4. So apparently, the Tommy Tremble is pretty much worth the 23 4th. We can wipe those two off.
Yeah.
So we're talking 118 for 82.9. Again, we always say when you want the better player, you pay up a little bit. I'm also not really that into Terrace Marshall. But I have to say, value-wise, it's fine to me. And this is the right move, assuming you're a Terrace Marshall guy. You get rid of a running back who isn't going to do anything for your team that's not competing. You go get a young wide receiver and a pick. So while I'm with you, I don't necessarily agree with the guy you got, but this is beautiful process on both sides. because Terrace Marshall isn't scoring points and James Conner will.
Yep.
And I guess really it's the same exact argument. You know, Terrace Marshall's not going to score you points when you're rebuilding, and you get rid of James Conner, who will score points. So I love this trade. It's exactly what you need to do.
Yeah, I agree with you that the fact that I think they chose the wrong young wide receiver, because I'm not a Terrace Marshall guy, and I'm actually going to be working on another video talking about faceplant wide receivers. If you're in the community, you might have seen some analysis about rookie wide receivers who faceplant in dynasty value, guys like Jalen Reagor, N'Keal Harry, all those guys like that. Some people say, well, they're excellent buy lows at their price point and stuff, but then the counter argument is that they face planted for a reason.
They might just be bad.
They're actually not worth investing in. And Terrace Marshall is, I think, going to come out to be one of those guys in this year's wide receiver class, because his value before the season as the expected wide receiver 2 over Robbie Anderson for the Panthers to now that where he's a healthy scratch in most weeks recently is a big time problem. So I don't agree that James Conner for Terrace Marshall there. I understand the value if you are a Terrace Marshall guy and you do believe in that kind of buy low thing. But I'm with you. I believe that James Conner has some value going into next year. And I was watching Ask DLF, the live stream show that we do last night. It's with Cal and Carp, and they had a question about James Conner, and they said the same thing, that he kind of has pretty solid 2022 value, because even though he's not under contract, him and Chase Edmonds are actually both free agents. And Benjamin's the only running back on the Cardinals right now under contract next year.
The only one they need, yeah.
Sure. But I expect James Conner to be re-signed based on the season that he's had, and I expect him to get a pretty decent, like, 2 years, $16-17 million deal or something like that, kind of in that range. And if that's the case, he's going to have solid dynasty value next year again. And yeah, I like it. So I'm on
you want to bump up on the other side.
Yeah, like if you could turn Terrace Marshall into, like, man, do you think you could get Rondale Moore? Like Connor for Rondale Moore?
I think the hype on Moore is just too high. He had that one game at like week 2, and his value never settled from that. Like maybe Bateman.
I don't think you can get Bateman. I think Bateman's way higher.
I think Moore is higher than Bateman at this point.
Would you do like Visca?
Yeah, I mean, I like Visca more than Marshall, but I mean, his usage is also terrifying. But he's getting usage as opposed to Marshall, who is not.
I think you're just in a weird, like, all the wide receivers that do have good prospect moving forward are probably not going to be wide receivers you're moving for James Conner. And then the ones that you are the ones that,
yeah, it's risk for risk, right? Risk of maybe this running back doesn't get me points in 2022 versus maybe this wide receiver is just bad.
Yep.
All right. Yeah, it makes sense. Let's move on to this next one because it's a lot more straightforward. Oh, you got 2 of them. Okay. Let's just read them both out because they are both 12-team Superflex. We have one trade of James Conner for a late 22 first or James Conner for a 22 second. So the answer the question becomes, if you're competing, you have your first, you're making the playoffs, but you still want that extra piece. Do you send your first for James Conner? I think so. I would try my second. Well, you're not going to get, I don't think you'll get him with a late second unless someone's just like, I need to get out. But if you had like a mid early second that looked like a mid and early second, I would try that first.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could pull the trigger on sending a first.
The analyzer, I mean,
well, yeah,
a late first is 3 times the value on James Conner. Even if you want to bump up Conner because you value him more as a competitor.
Yeah.
It's still heavy on the first, and that first come April and May, like if you have that first and somebody says, yo, I'll give you James Conner for your first, and you're going to get laughed at.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. But this is one of those times where you do James Conner in a second for a first because, I didn't read them out loud. The late first is 224 and the second is 113.5. So adding the second to James Conner puts him at pretty much 200. So 200 for 224. I mean, that's negligible at that point because not the only asset scoring points is James Conner. So I mean, that comes into comes into effect a little bit when it comes to values. And I think that's probably more what you have to do if you want to get a first out of this. I can't imagine this going down in a league I'm in. Clearly it did go down because we're looking at it, but like, I would be surprised to see this go in our leagues.
I think it was somebody who got really desperate. Like, they just lost Dalvin Cook, or they had Christian McCaffrey and he came back and then got injured again or something like that. And like, they're getting really desperate. They couldn't get Leonard Fournette or, Cordero Patterson or something like that to fill in at running back. So they went down to James
Melvin
Conner.
Gordon. Let's just start listing guys that are good for the rest of the year.
Yeah, all those types of players. And yeah, I think that this is just kind of like a desperation. Man, I'm in the playoffs, but I really need this running back.
Yeah. And again, he's going to score you points. And if you win, it's worth it. Yeah, but that's not something you can measure right now.
Yeah, you got to win.
But okay, how would you feel giving up a late? We're going to move on after this because we're talking about James Conner for a while. If you send your late first for James Conner, but you have someone in your league who is a James Conner guy, so you could say, I'll pay my first, and then in 5 weeks after the season, I can go sell James Conner for a second. Would you make that 12 pick difference as a rental?
Probably.
I mean, that is super specific. It's just something that was in my head that I wanted to say out loud.
I definitely think that if you do that you could get a second round pick for him when he re-signs with the Cardinals in the early spring. Yeah. Or maybe wait till after the draft and you see that the Cardinals didn't really take anybody. Like they re-signed Connor, they still have Eno, they let Edmonds walk, and then they drafted somebody in round 4.
Yeah, like
or something like that.
Or some late round pick. Yeah.
Because then I think that you could get a second for James Conner, and then you just kind of take a little bit of a loss, but you took him at the opportunity and the chance to actually win a championship. I would definitely be okay with the little bit of ROI loss.
Yeah, just wanted to put a situation out there that some people might be able to apply to themselves, even if it's not for James Conner or this specific situation. Next guy, I've missed out on so many trades to try and get Hunter Renfrow because people outbid me. Because I get it. He's scoring a lot of points, but just applying the value that is necessary for the amount of points he's scoring, I can't do just yet. And I'm looking at these trades, and I guess we'll talk about it. 10-team Superflex League. The trade is a 22-second and Hunter Renfrow for Cam Akers and Julio Jones. The second comes in at 113.5. Hunter Renfrow, a sad little 67.5. Cam Akers up at 170 still, and Julio Jones still, I mean, it's only 92.8, but I'm still surprised it's that high.
Yeah, that'll fall more.
Yeah, so this is a total of 181 for the Renfrow side to 263.6. Here's my thing. I don't understand this trade at all, so I can't really pick anything. If I'm competing, I want Renfrow. If I'm not competing, I don't want Julio Jones. Like, it's really weird pieces. And then Cam Akers is a next year's piece, and the pick is a next year's piece. So I don't really know what's going on. But if I had to choose, honestly, pure fear, pure scared of the unknown, I would take Renfrow in the second, even if the value is technically less. We are at the point where Julio Jones is retire on your roster. I mean, I don't. A second is 113.5. Julio Jones is 92.8, but I don't think you're getting a second for Julio anymore. And are you going to settle for a third? No, because he's still Julio Jones. So if all goes horribly wrong, Akers doesn't come back or he does come back and he's just a running back 3 because he's splitting with Henderson and he's just not what he used to be. Julio Jones is probably a wide receiver 3 at best because he's old and constantly hurt. You take this pick and you bust on it. Hunter Renfrow is still catching the ball a lot. That's not going to change anytime soon. The quarterback's not changing. Even if the coach changes, everyone loves a good slot receiver. Even before Waller was hurt, Hunter Renfrow was catching a lot of balls. He was getting a lot of targets. So to me, the only real piece I want in this is Hunter Renfrow.
That's why I like the Hunter Renfrow on the second side, because I know you said that like the second is a next year's piece, but for competing teams, like that's a really good way to stay competitive on a year-to-year basis, is moving those assets that and gaining picks back to kind of just hit the reset button.
Yeah.
Right. So if we agree that we want Hunter Renfrow over either Akers or Julio Jones, and then take the second over the other one, I think that's a pretty solid move to make for a competing team. And then you can move that second to do things with in the future, maybe before your deadline again, or, actually use it next year or trade it to make your team better for next year. I still like that move as a competing team. And I do like Hunter Renfrow. I think that his value is going to be really interesting heading into next year. I was actually tagged in a trade poll. Who would you rather have in Dynasty, Renfrow or Juju Smith-Schuster?
Someone asked me that exact question, weirdly enough. I said Juju.
Yeah.
I just think he has an upside Renfrow doesn't have.
I think he has it depends on where he signs.
But really interesting. That's part of the risk. That's the only reason he's in a conversation with Renfrow.
Yeah. And that makes Renfrow really interesting to me because he is kind of the only guy there with Darren Waller.
Mm-hmm.
But that situation could change so quickly. Like in that same trade poll that I was tagged in, you might have been tagged in it too. But John Hogue is talking a lot in it as well and talking about Juju versus Renfrow. And he basically compared Hunter Renfrow to Tyler Boyd like 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Just saying that he's just like really good slot receiver. He's going to produce for you. But when that team adds alphas, he's going to start fading away. The problem is the Raiders need to find alphas, and they haven't really been all that successful in drafting wide receivers.
But also when they had I know we're not talking about Hunter Renfrow for a second, but when the Bengals had one alpha, Boyd was still killing it. Yeah. When it was just AJ Green, when it was just T. Higgins, Boyd was, and now that it's Higgins and Jamar Chase, okay, there's a little bit too much going on.
Mm-hmm.
But still, and Renfrow seems to be stealing looks from Waller, whether it's just because Waller isn't healthy or I don't know. But Renfrow seems like a great piece. Let's move on to the next trade because I feel like we could talk about all of this for way too long, and this needs to be less than 2 hours. In a 12-team Superflex league, Hunter Renfrow for Kadarius Toney and a third. Would you believe at any point that you had to pay up from Kadarius Toney to get Hunter Renfrow? I get Kadarius Toney fell into that grouping of like Marquise Brown and Henry Ruggs, where they were first round NFL draft, fell to the second in our rookie drafts. But no one really, after taking him, valued him at a second. That too, that's the problem.
Yeah.
But I mean, even, Toney got on the field, and if the dude could breathe without getting injured, shows that he's talented.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the fact that it's really just intriguing to me, because the analyzer agrees. In 12-team Superflex, Renfrow is worth 67.5, Toney 107.8, a third, the 22 third 40.9. So this seems to be a decent-sized overpay for Hunter Renfrow. I would do it. I got to be honest. And there's a 3-year age difference. I mean, Hunter Renfrow is 25, Kadarius Toney is 22.
Mm-hmm.
25 for a slot receiver means absolutely nothing. Like, I'm not worried about Keenan Allen at 29 because it has nothing to do with speed. That's not the point of him. So I'm absolutely fine just giving up those 3 years, getting a guy who we know will produce, who is producing, instead of waiting for the next Percy Harvin, just to use a really overused, comparison guy. And on the other hand, no, I don't know. Like, if I'm rebuilding, I feel like I think I'm stuck in that first trade with Connor and Terrace Marshall. I honestly do. I loved watching Toney play whenever he was on the field for the Giants.
We had that one amazing game.
Yeah, and he's had a couple of plays since then, but exactly, he had one game, 6 plays, and hurt otherwise. So again, this is a perfect trade to me, where it's young wide receiver where we've seen something from them for wide receiver who is scoring a lot of points right now. And then you throw a third just to get the deal done. Again, I love the idea of this trade, but the right wide receivers involved, I don't think I get behind that swap.
I think this is better on a rebuild versus a competing team, because if you're rebuilding, I want Kadarius Toney over Hunter Renfrow, because Hunter Renfrow's value ceiling is very low.
Yes.
Like, he could literally be the next Adam Thielen, and he would maybe crack the top 20. Maybe. I don't even know if he would.
Hey, man, we say that, and there was like 6 days where I should say like 6 weeks where Adam Thielen was the Dynasty wide receiver 1, and then he fell instantly back to 30-something.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's so we're so not into these slot wide receivers at all. But Kadarius Toney, if he came back for one more game before the season and put up like 10 for 120 or something,
Not
like
even
what he
that.
did,
I think if he just played like 3 straight games without getting hurt, his value would settle
and looked fine. Like, he would be like one of those guys that everybody's like really, really into next year, and then his value would just start spiking because he's 22 years old. He's got the first round pedigree. He's super fast. You know, he plays on a team that, you know, all the wide receivers are just really weird, and we don't really like any of them. So we tell ourselves that he's going to be the wide receiver 1.
Brandon Ayuk.
And exactly. I think that's a fantastic comp. And that's essentially where Kadarius Toney's value is going to come from next spring. And that's why it's going to be potentially higher than Hunter Renfrow's. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Kadarius Toney in like February ADP is higher than Hunter Renfrow.
Oh, if we did a mock right now, I think Kadarius Toney would be higher than Hunter Renfrow. That doesn't mean I agree with it.
Yeah. That's just that's just where we are with these rookies, and especially these explosive players that show like just like the
change of
tiniest
direction
thing
is disgusting.
Yeah, I mean, he could be like the next Marquise Goodwin, and for all we know, and
go to the Olympics.
valuable.
Okay, cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so I want you to introduce the next guy because this one was completely on you.
Oh, George Kittle is so weird to me because I don't know what he is. Because I know we talked about it a couple weeks ago when we talked about Kyle Pitts. Like, there are still people that have George Kittle as like the dynasty tight end 1 because, you know, on film, he's like the best tight end in the league in terms of everything that he can do. But then he gets hurt like 3, 4, 5, 6 games out of the year. And then he comes back and he's like putting up 20 points like he just did this past week. So I don't really know where I should be valuing George Kittle because I still see the elite upside, but I see some of the downfall and risks as well. And with him and Deebo Samuel, and the Niners always want to be a running game, you know, run first team. It's really weird to me. And I don't know where to value George Kittle. So that's why I wanted to put him in here as like kind of an interesting player to see where his value's at before trade deadlines, because he could be somebody I think that you could buy potentially on the cheap as a top 3 tight end for the remainder of the year. Or, you know, if his value is still super high, maybe you want to sell off of that and move down in tight end rankings or get something for him that is also more usable for the year as well, but has better longevity. I don't know. It's just, I'm very confused.
All right. Well, I mean, let's go through these trades and see how they make you feel about it. That's really the best way to gauge, right? In a 12-team, 1 quarterback league, George Kittle for Dallas Goedert and a 23 first. George Kittle in the 12-team, 1 quarterback, 374.8. The other side, the 23 first, is 253.3. Dallas Goedert 177 after the adjustment, a total of 401.4. So that's pretty much dead on. Now this seems to be exactly both sides of what you said before, because to me, Dallas Goedert, who is that, he's not really in that chunk of the middle. He's like maybe 3rd tier tight end for me. It's like he's separated from that mush, but he's not a top tier guy for me.
Yeah. So
this is someone who said, I need that elite tight end. Let me throw in a 23 first and go get George Kittle. On the other hand, another person said, I have George Kittle. I don't know, man. Let me either get younger by 2 years or let me just downgrade and get some extra pieces, and got a 23 first on top of a very usable tight end. So I guess my question to you is, I mean, look at this trade. Would you send Goddard and a 23 first to go get Kittle, or would you sell Kittle for Goddard and a 23 first?
Man, I should not have put this trade in here, because then that meant that I was going to have to talk about it, because I don't know how to feel about this trade.
All right, you want me to do it? I'll do it.
This is one of those ones where, like, you know, I see both sides of it perfectly. Like it just depends on what your opinion of George Kittle is and what your opinion of Dallas Goedert is. And I don't really have an opinion on either one of those two. So Russ, I think you need to tell me how to feel because I don't know how to feel.
I am scared of George Kittle. I will say that with, I don't know, certainty, conviction, whatever that word you want to throw in there. I don't have him on any of my teams, and I don't think I will, because I was riding that Gronk train towards the end of his Patriots career, where it was, okay, I'm going to have a top 3 tight end in points per game. Because you knew Gronk was going to miss 2 to 3 games a season. And it seems like, not even counting this year where he missed a lot of games, it seems like Kittle will miss a few games every single season, because he has for the past few years. And he hasn't been in the league all that long. So I like this move, because here's why. Depending on efficiency scares me. Even if we've seen it for many years and we see that it's a real thing, we've always known, let's go back a little bit. We've known that Golden Tate was always great. He was one of the best players after the catch. And like statistically, his yards after catch was fantastic. So it didn't matter how many catches he got. It didn't matter that he was only, I'm making up numbers here, but if I saw that Golden Tate was only averaging 5-6 targets a game, that wouldn't really scare me, and still be able to value him as a high-end wide receiver too, because you know there's a very statistically very good chance he's going to do something with at least a few of those targets to gain more points, whether it's bringing it for a touchdown or at least get like a 15-20 yard play. And that's Kittle. And I don't know, like, I don't know why I was able to do that with Golden Tate, but I can't do it with George Kittle. I like George, because it's not a tight end thing. I think that's really what's sticking to me. Like, George Kittle isn't your everyday tight end.
Yeah,
everybody in San Francisco is made to get yards after the catch, which is, I mean, that's their game. And Kittle and Debo and Ayuk all fit perfectly. But here's my thing: Dallas Goedert is going to get a lot of targets. He might not do or catch as many as Kittle would in that same system or with that same amount of targets. But to me, Goddard's safer. Goddard, anecdotally, because I don't have numbers in front of me and I don't know off the top of my head, I feel like Goddard has missed less games in the past few years. I know he has missed 1 or 2 because I have him on a few teams. But especially going forward with Devonta Smith, Jalen Reagor, and Dallas Goedert being it on that team, I think a lot would need to change for Goddard to lose his target share. In which case, give me a very safe tight end with a future first for what is right now seen to be a very good draft class, and I will feel great, especially since this doesn't say tight end premium on it.
So I'm just going through numbers and stuff, like looking up like production and everything, and on the year, George Kittle's tight end 3 in points per game. Dallas Goedert's tight end 12. Okay. But then I tried to filter down to, you know, what does Dallas Goedert look like without Zach Ertz? Because he had Ertz for like the first half of the year. Yeah. So since week 7, George Kittle is the tight end 1 in points per game, and Goedert is 11. So we kind of have that discrepancy there. I'm looking at George Kittle's game log.
I mean, he
still gets 10, 8, 7, 4, 2, 12 targets. Like, I feel like what's really weird whenever I was looking at this game log for George Kittle, I don't think I knew that he was getting this kind of volume on top of scoring touchdowns this year, because he like tied his season high in touchdowns this past week.
Oh, wow. Good for him.
But this looks a lot like Darren Waller's game log, because Waller's been really up and down as well, not just this year, but in the past couple of years. Like, he has those games where he gets like 14 targets and he has like 10 for 120 and 1. But then he has those games where it just like, it was kind of a Josh Jacobs week and he had like 4 targets and then he went like 3 for 30. And you're just kind of like, where did my Darren Waller go? Kittle, I think, is kind of the same way. But for some reason, like you said with Golden Tate, I'm okay with Darren Waller, but I don't feel that for George Kittle. I don't know why. So I think I would take... I love getting the first on top of Dallas Goedert. I think that's fantastic. But I think I would take George Kittle. I think I would take the known commodity and the known production that we have seen from him and go for that, what if he doesn't get hurt this year? You know what I'm saying? Like I made that bet with Will Fuller last year. I loved it. I tried to make that bet with James Conner in a lot of leagues. So far it's worked out where he hasn't been hurt. I tried to do that with Keenan Allen. Like those players that like they get injured, so they have that injury prone label. But then you go, what if they didn't get hurt? Like, what if, So if that is George Kittle next year, maybe George Kittle plays 14, 15, 16 games next year, like he did in 2019 and 2018, where he was like a game-breaking tight end for you every single week. If that happens, he's going to be worth more than Dallas Goedert in a first, even if Dallas Goedert is, like kind of ish Mark Andrews in a sense, or like tight end 5, tight end 6. Kittle would be worth that. So I think I'll take Kittle.
Look at that. We're learning things as we go. Nice. The next trade, 10-team, 1 quarterback, a guy you actually just mentioned, George Kittle and Corey Davis for Josh Jacobs, on the other hand. This is probably going to be tough because of how badly we talked about Josh Jacobs. I think it was last week. So are we both just going to say George Kittle?
Yep.
And sorry, to be fair on that one, the analyzer agrees. Kittle's worth 334.8 and Josh Jacobs is worth 326.3. So even though we think that the analyzer is probably a little high on Josh Jacobs, it's already higher on George Kittle. But also, to me, the lesser amount of teams in the league, the more valuable tight end is, because it gives you a positional advantage. Actually, no, that's still kind of backwards.
That's backwards.
My bad. Never mind. My brain not on cue right now. Hold on. Let's drink my brain juice. It's just water. I got nothing. Okay. So ignore everything I just said, and I still want Kittle. If I'm going to trade someone who is valued as a top 3 or 4 tight end, I want a guy I feel good about starting as a running back. And clearly Corey Davis is just a whatever throw in. I mean, I so many 101 shares drafted of Corey Davis, but
big rips.
It don't matter no more. So like the smallest of step up from Josh Jacobs, who I'm of course blanking on anyone who I would have right above him because my mind's just like, go get Austin Eckler, go get Austin Eckler, go get Joe Mixon. And I'm like, no, those are too high from what we're trying to think about right now. But again, value wise, 466.6 to 326.3. This is clearly on the Kittle side. But like you said before, this was probably a desperation move. Someone probably just lost Swift or CMC, or they had Saquon or Zeke or any one of the top 24 running backs not named Joe Mixon or Austin Eckler or Jonathan Taylor. Everyone else dead. So that's really what this is. I don't feel good about it. To me and you, this is clearly the Kittle side. All right, let's move on to our horrible trades, which anytime you see a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for 1, it's going to be a bad trade. 12-team, 1 quarterback. Let's a 22-second Jarvis Landry, Khalil Herbert, CJ Uzomah, and Mo Alley Cox, who and the analyzer come in at a total of, man, let me just do this math without the package. So like 321.5 for George Kittle, who is 374.8.
Yeah, without the 107-point package adjustment for
it's
5
still,
for 1.
Still George Kittle. Like, this is one of those, hey, let me use the analyzer to try and get it as close to mathematically as I can and see what happens. And you just got lucky. Like, this is, if you get someone who's like, oh, I don't like calculators or analyzers, this is why they don't, because this makes it look like a good trade. Yeah. Well, if there were no package adjustment, it makes it look close. And this isn't. There's no piece on the other side that is worth trading away George Kittle for. Even if half your team got hurt, you're not starting Herbert. You're not going to feel good about starting Uzomah, and not going to feel good about starting Mo Alley Cox, even though I'm a little shocked with how little he's doing. And a 22 seconds, nice and all, but again, we're talking about George Kittle. This upsets me for many reasons, because this is what gives analyzers the bad name. Just like completely compiling value and bad value.
What's funny is you could basically get the same value from just Landry in the second. You didn't need the
Yeah,
other
because taking away Herbert and Uzuma is the package, and yeah, pretty much Mo Alley Cox as well. Yeah, right. Landry in a, and the thing is, like, would you do Landry in a second for George Kittle?
No.
And
but I would feel better about that trade than Landry in a second. And then what if I threw in Khalil Herbert, CJ Uzuma, and Mo Alley Cox? Would that swing it for you?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm kind of feeling iffy on Kittle for Landry in a second. Let me throw 6 things in here and see how it goes.
My favorite thing was in our analyzer, right underneath this, it would say like you have a difference of like 160 points or whatever the difference is. And then it's like, here are some suggested players that you could add to make the trade even. And the first one was Dak Prescott. And then it went to like Darrell Henderson and like Travis Etienne. And I'm like, man, like these are some pretty high names
that you need to even it out.
That you need to just to even it out to get to George Kittle.
Yeah, and the thing is, again, it's probably just because of the package adjustment, because you added 5 players for one. No, shouldn't do it. No, don't do it. There's no reason for it. Don't do it. Whew. All right. Well, this has been another amazingly, fantastically wonderful episode of the DLF Trade Show. I'm your host, Russ Fisher at Dynasty Outhouse. He is your host, Addison Hayes at AmazeHayes_. We'll catch you next time.